Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Passions. And I'm so pleased today to be joined by Lee Connolly. And I was just telling him before we went on air, I did actually Google him. He says he doesn't Google himself. But if you do Google him, you'll be amazed at his background, what he's done, the things he's done, the variety of what he's done. So thanks very much for joining me today, Lee. Please tell us what your passion is and what you do.
My pleasure. Thanks, Phil. I'm what's known as a creative director in the television industry, which is I'm creative. I hope I'm creative, but I'm not a director as such. But it's I suppose it's shorthand for producer. If it was 20 years ago, I'd be a producer, a television producer, and that's what I consider myself as. And as for my passion, well, that's it in a nutshell. It's television in all its forms. And, you know, I'd imagine in our chat going forward now, you'll realise how incredibly diverse that passion is across that genre.
It quite often is, or it certainly can be, can't it? So, okay, so tell me the story. Tell me the Lee Connolly story. I'm assuming you didn't just come out of the womb and we're watching the television in the hospital. What exactly happened? How did it happen? How did it come about?
Well, I suppose I didn't know that it was going to be my big passion in life. I suppose it kind of crept up on me, you know, sort of unsuspectingly, really. And you know, I'm a working class kid from a working class family in Liverpool, you know, and we watched a load of telly when we were kids, and we even used to have to put 50 pences in the back of the telly because we had to hire the telly from Radio Rentals. And if you didn't have a 50p to go in the back of the telly, you couldn't watch it. But and when I look back at that time, you know, and we used to watch telly as a family at the weekends, you know, and watch all the great big game shows and variety shows. And, you know, we were real sort of lovers of that. But I suppose that I wasn't really aware of that at the time. And it wasn't until much later in life, you know, how much of an effect that time had on me and what it would give me later on in life, you know, that sort of grounding in light entertainment and all things sort of TV related, really. And, you know, I can weirdly sort of remember moments in my childhood that are connected to like TV shows, you know, or, you know, so like, you know, I remember sort of, you know, if I'm having Sunday lunch, and I, you know, and it might not even be true. This I don't know in terms of the scheduling of it. If I'm having Sunday lunch, all I can hear in the back of my mind now is the Black Beauty theme. Do you remember Black Beauty, the show?
Something like this. Da-dum, da-da, da-dum,
Yeah,
da-da. I've never done that on this show ever before.
There you go. Yeah, well, it's kind of like, so anyway, it's deep in my sort of psyche, the whole thing. And then you kind of, you know, I suppose I had a very unusual way of starting to work in TV because, you know, being a kid in the late 70s and early 80s, television and working in television was even though Granada was a massive thing in Manchester, working in television was just something that kids like me didn't do. You know, you were lucky. If you were lucky, you got an apprenticeship, you know, and that's what you did. And, you know, not so much working class kids get working class jobs, but it was kind of very much like you did what your dad did, or you did what your Uncle John did, or your Uncle John got you a job down at the local builder's yard, and that's what you did, and that's what you followed. And then you just, and you know, growing up in that environment, you kind of just did what came along, you know, what came across your path, you did. And, you know, the whole idea of working in an environment that was your real passion was just something that wasn't, or didn't feel like it was open to people like me at that time. And so I got an apprenticeship. I became an apprentice scaffolder of all things. And so I started out life as a scaffolder.
Did it tend to be just for the university kids? I'm generalizing massively, but was there an element that was university or middle to higher class?
Well, when I started in television much later on, that clearly was the case. Of all my contemporaries in television when I first started were all largely Oxbridge, and didn't come from an environment like mine, didn't come from a background like mine. And there were very, very, very few people that I came across that were a little bit like me. Very, very few. It's very different now, I have to say. So I suppose at that age, it just didn't even cross my path. I loved it. I loved telly. It was a big part of my life in terms of my sort of like chilling out time and stuff. But it was beyond the stars, beyond any reach of being able to work in it. I never even thought of it. And it wasn't until I got to around 25, 26 when, I just thought, I wanted a change in my life. And I didn't want to be a sort of scaffolder forever, and even though I'd moved into the office structure and I was management, I wasn't on the tools anymore as such. I just thought, God, is this my life forever at 26? And because I left school at 15 without any sort of qualifications, I just thought, you know what, I needed to change me. So I went and got a couple of A-levels, packed my job in, went to university to study art and culture of all things, God knows why. But because back then, when I was 26, 27, 28, there was a real big push to get kids that had become young adults back into education that had missed out first time around, and I was one of them. And I got a real sort of love for, that academic world really quickly, and realized that I was pretty good at it, and I was really interested in it, and I was a really diligent student and never missed a lecture, and and while I was at university, I started volunteering for a local radio station in Liverpool, and quickly sort of realized that I had a real sort of love for it. Ended up presenting my own show on a Friday night. And it was Sunshine Radio, 1413 AM with about 10 listeners. But I was producing and presenting my own show on a Friday night.
You've got to start somewhere. I'm impressed already.
And then, what happened then? So I was about 29, 30 when I came out of university, having worked at the radio station part-time while I was at university for about a year and a half or something. And I had real pretensions then to get into radio. And I really tried to get into radio. I had a couple of meetings down in London, but it was like, with the BBC, and they were disastrous meetings. It was like walking into an alien world where, 2 or 3 Oxbridge types behind a desk, and you'd be sat there and they'd be asking you all these questions. They were clearly much smarter than me, much more educated than me. They worked in a job that I really wanted to do. And I was so super nervous about it, even though I'm a pretty confident guy generally. And they were just disasters. And I came out of those sorts of meetings and interviews thinking, you know what, it's not for me. It's actually not for me. I should go back to what people like me do. I should go
where
back
you belong.
Yeah, go back.
Awful, isn't it? Yeah, where you belong.
Awful. Anyway, so what I did, so I got my 2-1 from Liverpool University, and I had this radio experience, and it was the summertime, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? So I thought, you know what, I'll become a teacher. So I signed on to do a PGCE, which is the 1 year sort of extra postgraduate certificate you get to become a teacher. But during that summer, I had a chance meeting with a guy called Crispin Laser, who worked in television as a comedy producer. And
what
of course,
great name! What a great name that is.
his name's Crispin Laser. I mean, like I've never met a Crispin in my life, and I met the guy through a mutual friend, and he was a brilliant guy, and I really liked him, even though he went to Oxford and his name was Crispin, and and he left Oxford and went straight into television as a comedy producer, and anyway, I really liked him. And he said to me that summer, he said, why don't you come and work in telly? You'd be great to work in telly. And I said, oh, you know what? I've tried radio. It's not really for me. I've come down to London, kids like me, I need to be back in Liverpool, And he went,
just while you're talking about that, sorry to interrupt you, but were you conscious of your accent as well? At that, back in those days when you were in that environment?
No, I don't think so, because I think that I was, I was really, I'm a proud Northerner,
Yeah.
And so I didn't feel like, even though nobody spoke like me particularly down in London, I didn't feel sort of inferior from that perspective. I suppose if I had any sort of inferiority sort of complexes, it was around upbringing, I guess, and And the fact that, you know, I came from a loving home, but we were proper poor. You know, we lived in a council house. We put 50p's in the back of the telly, otherwise it didn't work. When, you know, and meeting these people that, even though I had a degree, by then I've got a degree and I've got A levels and I've proved myself academically, I just always still felt they were much, much smarter than me. And so that was my inferiority. It didn't have anything to do with my accent. If anything, I used to sort of, I would probably go more Scouse the more pressure I felt in a situation where I felt uncomfortably inferior. I'd become even more Scouse rather than less so. And maybe
the reason I ask you is because I can remember my career was similar in sense that I went down south to work down south in Peterborough, and we used to go down. I ended up in senior management, and we used to go down on the train to London. And obviously, I'm a Mancunian, and there are all these guys around me who were you know, talking very much like that, you know, Surrey type of accents. And I always used to hear myself and think, God, you sound so common. And I was embarrassed at actually trying to become less Noel Gallagher, you know. Yeah. And I was embarrassed at doing it, but I was doing it, which is the reason I asked you the question.
Yeah, no worries. You know, and maybe if I'd have been a bit younger, I might have been. But by then, you've got to remember that I'm 29, 30, so I'm a grown man with quite a successful construction industry career behind me.
Yeah.
And I'd gained a lot of confidence from being able to enter into that academic world and succeed at it, you know, and be pretty good at it as well, which was, you know, which was a surprise to me and my parents and everybody that knew me, you know. But anyway, it was kind of so anyway. So this guy in the summer, this Crispin who I met, just said to me, "Why don't you, you know, you should work in telly?" And I was like, "Oh, you know, it's not for me." And he said, "Why don't you come and work for me just for the 6-week summer holiday and just see if you like it?" And I went, "Oh, I don't know, you know, moving to London." He said, "Come and live with me, you know, me and my missus, you know, we've got a spare room, stay with me, and you can be a researcher on a TV show called The People versus Jerry Sadowitz." Jerry Sadowitz is this mad, crazy Scottish magician stroke comedian who's brilliant. And he had this like weird chat show back in the day. And I just wanted to, you know what, why not? So I went down to London, stayed with Crispin and his partner for 6 weeks. And I remember in the first week of that job, I'm sat in the LWT Tower on the South Bank on the 11th floor overlooking the river with a load of sort of really young, sort of vibrant, largely Oxbridge educated people who were in this incredible environment, this really creative environment. And I remember sitting there, you know, after about 3 or 4 days, and definitely still in the first week, and thinking, have I died and gone to heaven here? This is, do people actually get paid to do this stuff? Because I'd do it for free. It was like, oh my God. And I swear to you, by the end of that week, I'd made my mind up. I was never going back north. You know, I was going to stay right there in London, and I was going to make this work as a job for me, because right at that very moment, that for me, that was it. I was like, this is the job for me. I could not believe people got paid to do it. I thought people would do it for free. It was that good. And so all that enthusiasm and all that passion really came out. And I literally stayed at LWT that later became, you know, Granada and all the different incarnations and Carlton and all the different incarnations that ITV was. I stayed there for 20 years. And only left 2 years ago. And I started as a researcher, and a couple of years later became an AP on all the Cilla Black shows and all the Michael Barrymore shows. And I was learning all this amazing stuff, you know, on those shows. So, you know, it was like, you know, Moment of Truth and Surprise, and, you know, My Kind of Music with Michael Barrymore, and Kids Say the Funniest Things, and Barrymore the Chat Show, and all these amazing shows and all these amazing, I mean, Michael Barrymore and Cilla Black at the time were the biggest stars on television, and I'm working on their shows. It's amazing. And then, you know, literally 5 or 6 years into my sort of TV career, I think I'd just done, helped set up Saturday Night Takeaway, the first series, and helped develop that and helped produce that first series as one of many producers. And I got offered I got offered the job to produce Cilla on Blind Date, and I was like, Blind Date?
Well, I was going to ask you that actually, because I've asked this to a few people that we've interviewed. And do you ever remember a moment when you've kind of suddenly thought, how the hell did this happen? When you were, I guess in the early days, was there an element of being starstruck and being like, wow, these are the people that everybody knows? And, or did you just take it for granted and take it in your stride fairly quickly?
Well, weirdly, and this is the thing that I think massively helped me. I'm relatively old starting off in television. I'm 29, 30, right? So that's old, because most of my contemporaries who were researchers were 21, 22, 23, right? So I'm 8, 9 years older than everybody else. But also I'd had this life. I'd left school at 15, become quite successful in the construction industry, left it all, went back to university. Most people had just they went to school, did their A-levels, went to university, started in telly. But I'd had this whole life. So meeting Michael Barrymore and Cilla Black and meeting all these amazing producers and controllers of entertainment and all that sort of stuff, I took it all in my stride because, it was like, well, first of all, it was like really exciting for me, but not intimidating. And I think that's one of the reasons why I climbed the ladder so quickly, is I just wasn't intimidated at all by anybody. If anything, I was the opposite. I was probably, sort of like, I didn't care that Michael Barrymore was in the room. I'd just go in, have a chat. Somebody might, it's Michael Barrymore. Yeah, no, but I'll just go in and have a chat. And that's a little bit of your northern sensibility coming in as well. You kind of go, we're all dead friendly, aren't we, up north? So you kind of go, and in many ways, and a lot of producers that I worked for in the early days used to say to me that I was a breath of fresh air because, I was a little bit older. I'd had this life beforehand. I had all this sort of confidence and this, and what they realized really quickly is I had this encyclopedic knowledge of telly going back years and years and years because I'd watched it. I'd sat there. I'm the viewer. You know what I mean? So when Michael Barrymore, when Cilla Black is doing Blind Dates, and all those years she was doing Blind Dates, I'm the one at home watching it before I go out on a Saturday night, and kind of like, so what came across really quickly is my fandom, I suppose, of telly came across as real insightful knowledge when I started in the industry. So I was glad I spent all those years watching telly. I had a great knowledge of it. And of course, I think what really struck me was that, and this is the interesting thing about the whole passion thing, is when you've got a real passion for something, and I quickly realized I had this massive passion for it all, the job itself is pretty easy because you've got real passion for it. It's not hard. It gets harder later when you've got other bigger responsibilities and you're running teams and you're running, budgets, and your responsibility levels go through the roof. But in those early days when you're, someone says to you, I need a contestant who's done such and such and such. I need someone, we need a family that's such and such, on this show. I'd just go out and find them and be like, yeah, no problem. They're a piece of cake. And so that's one of the reasons why I think I climbed the ladder. And then just go back to your question about, was there a moment when I realized that, like almost like not quite an out of body experience, but I remember that my first show as a proper producer, and when I say a proper producer, I mean the guy in charge. I don't mean today there's 50 producers on every show and you never know which one is running it. But back then, if you were the producer, you ran the show. And so and my first Blind Date show that I produced, so that my first producer credit that comes right at the end of the credits, where producer Lee Connolly came up, I was like, wow. I'd never, ever expected that to happen in my life. And I remember that my girlfriend at the time, I was round at her parents' house, and and we were watching the show, and her parents, quite well to do, I don't think they even realised there was a Channel 3 button on their telly. They just used to watch BBC One, BBC Two, and once they suffered all the way through Blind Dates. And then when it got to the end, my girlfriend's mother stood up and went, okay, that's it, we can turn it off now. And she went and turned the telly off. I'm like, no, we've got to wait for the credits to go past. And I managed to get the telly back on just in time for the name to come up, say producer Lee Connolly, kind of like. And so anyway, so that was for me, that was the real proper beginning where I just thought, wow, this is going to be my life, you know.
And one of the things that I've noticed as we've gone through this journey of interviewing people and researching this whole area of passions is to what degree, because the passion is so deep or because the passion is so broad, it means that you'll go to that extra level to learn and educate yourself to become the very best you can be. Is that something you can relate to?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that, you know, I think when you've got a real passion for something and you know, you're living to work, it's a bit of a cliche, but you're living to work. I mean, you kind of, you know, I used to bounce into work, you know, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd be like, brilliant, it's work, I can go to work. And how many people can say that? Very few people, very few, very lucky people. And I remember I used to sort of bounce all the way. So I was living in Brixton, bounce my way to the South Bank, and I'd get into and you'd be waiting for the lifts, you know, for about half an hour, you know, and you kind of lifts would come and you get in the lift, and I'd be like, I'd be, you know, I'd be on my toes. I'm thinking, great, a day at work. I can't wait to see what the day brings, you know. And sometimes there'd be people in the lift and be like, oh God, another day here. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? Another day.
So Sunday nights you were excited, whereas everybody else wanted to jump off a bridge.
Sunday. I mean, Sundays I'd be, if I had the opportunity to, and this is what I used to do as well, is if there were any shows happening at the weekends that weren't even my shows, I'd be there, you know, and I'd be volunteering to help out on anybody else's shows. And if I ever give any advice to any kids that come through, you know, I just say, don't let your day stop, you know, at 6 o'clock in the show that you're working on. Constantly think about, you know, exploring other, you know, shows and other things, and build up your knowledge and your experience, because it all helps. And, you know, and if there's a big show that comes on telly that some other company are making, the BBC have got a brand new game show on, and you're in the game show business, watch it. Because you need to know what it's like. Don't just go, well, I'm just doing this and I'm not interested in that. You've got to, you know, you've got to know you've got to know everything about it and consume it. And when you've got a real passion for it, you do it naturally anyway, and you do it because it's like a second nature. And that's the difference, I think, between people that are really passionate about their jobs and people that just see it as a job, is that when you've got a passion for something, you don't work 9 to 6. You just work non-stop. You get up in the morning, think about it. You go to bed at night, you're still thinking about it. And some people would say that that's really unhealthy. No, it's not. Not when you've got a passion for it.
Not if you love it.
Yeah. You're spending time with people you love. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to have a job that you love, you know, I came from an area where people did jobs that they hated, but they did them because they had to work. They had to sort of, you know, work to live. You know what I mean? Without getting up at 6:30 in the morning and going on a building site and picking up scaffolding tubes and hauling them up the side of a building. They've got no money. They can't live. All my mates are like that up north. You know, they've got jobs that they can't bear, but they do it because it provides. And I'm in this amazing position where I'm doing something that I absolutely love. And lo and behold, it pays quite well, which is, you know,
cherry on the cake.
You know, and as people used to say to me, you know, well, money's great in telly, isn't it? I go, I don't know. You know, it's kind of like if they pay, you know, and I would never say this to, well, I can now because I'm my own boss, but you know, they could have paid me a quarter of what they paid me, and I'd have still done it.
If you analyze your passion for it, what are the certain elements of it or certain components of it that are particularly more you're more passionate about? Because if you talk about production or producing, it's a number of different things, isn't it? You know, if you say, for example, you're passionate about, its simplest form, fishing, you're passionate about going out, putting the rod in, hoping you catch something, pulling it out, and off you go home. But producing, I guess, talk me through all the different components of producing. That, because I'm sorry, I can imagine that people watch these shows. And it's a bit like events, isn't it? People watch these shows and I'm sure they've got absolutely no idea the amount of work and effort and energy that has to go into producing a show, the likes of, you know, Saturday Night Takeaway as an example, where there's so much going on. Are there particular components of it that you enjoyed more or enjoy more?
I think that the thing that I mean, I loved being a researcher and an AP in those early days, because you'd become sort of an expert. You'd do a show for 6 months, and during that 6 months, you'd become an expert at whatever that show was. And it could be a comedy show or an entertainment show, a quiz show, a game show. It could be anything. And the research that you put into it, you'd get to know really, really well. And what you'd do is you'd collate all this information and come up with all these ideas around the information that you were collating, and then present that forward into the producers for them to decide whether they were going to include it in the show or not. So it was an incredibly creative process. And the reason why I loved that time is because, yes, you had a bit of pressure on you to come up with the goods, but the ultimate pressure wasn't yours. Because you had a freedom of thought. So you could kind of go, the producer says to you, I want, a certain type of thing for the show. And your job is to go out and find it and research it and present it. And then if that ended up making its way onto the telly and it was really good part of the show, you'd be like, wow, without me, that wouldn't have happened. Without me going out and figuring all that out and presenting it forward, it wouldn't have happened. And so I loved all that side of things, and I still love that side of things now, because ultimately telly, and sort of light entertainment and, well, television largely across the board, from drama right through to, factual documentaries, is it starts with an idea. It takes somebody really creative to write that idea up and research that idea and to figure out how best to pitch that idea. Then you've got to figure out who to pitch it to and how to pitch it to them. And then you've got to try and get the money in to make it once it gets commissioned. And then you've got to manage it from the beginning right the way through to the end. And then you see it on the telly, and you hope then that people like it. And that process is the same kind of no matter what you do in telly. And some people are better at some bits of it and other people are better at other bits of it. But for me, I was always, that I love that idea of starting with it's almost like you start with a blank sheet of paper, and then you build and you build and you build and you build and you build, and then you see it right the way through to fruition. And you see it right at the very end. And that's why people like me, I suppose, end up running large slates like I was at ITV and all that type of stuff, is because my knowledge base goes from the very acorn of it right the way through to the delivery of it and everything. And I love every bit of it. But my favorite bit is that beginning creative bit where you're thinking about things and bringing it together and figuring out exactly what it is. And that's the joy. When you get further up the ladder and further up the responsibility chain, and you get further up the, you become much more accountable for what ends up being on screen. The pressures start to mount, and it becomes a little less enjoyable, because you can pour your heart and soul into something, and you think it's brilliant, and you put it on the telly and nobody watches. Or it gets criticised in the press, because they think it's a load of rubbish. And you're like, what? That's my baby.
How very dare you?
Baby, it's like, how can you not see that it's brilliant? But there's one thing, and I promise not to name drop too much all the way through. And you probably know me well enough now to realise that it doesn't matter to me. It's kind of like they're just people, aren't they? Yeah. Jonathan Ross said to me, I did sort of 200 Jonathan Ross chat shows on ITV and over 200 shows, and I wasn't doing the day-to-day nuts and bolts of the show, because you've got teams to do that, right? But you're there and you're sort of overseeing stuff. And Jonathan said to me one day, he said, the one thing about this business that you've got to really understand, and if you don't understand it, you will fall, and you will fall from a great height, is you've got to understand that nothing is personal. Don't ever take anything personally. So you put your heart and soul into a show and you put it on the telly and nobody likes it, don't take it personally. If you pitch a show into somebody and they turn it down, don't take it personally. If you work for a company for 20 years and they decide to get, people lose their jobs, and it's taken out of their own, out of, they don't decide to leave, they get chucked out, which happened a lot when I was at ITV. Don't take it personally, because if you do, nothing down for you. And Jonathan said that to me, and I always remembered that. And I just thought, actually, it helps me. So when I work really hard on a pitch and put it in, and ITV or BBC or Channel 4, they turn it down, I just go, right, okay, fair enough. I'll just make sure that the next thing I pitch to you is something that you're going to really love. And that's the way you've got to be. You've just got to get rid of it. Get rid of all that negativity, because in this industry, there's no room for anybody that's negative. You can only be positive. And you've got to be glass half full, because if you're not, it's too cruel. It's too cruel a sort of industry to not be positive.
I came across something a few years ago now that really stuck with me, particularly relating to sales. We do training and coaching and consultancy and business development, and they called it the 5 SWs. And they said, some will, some won't, so what, stop whining, someone's waiting. And I thought that was just something that you can remember, and that ended up going on a poster on the wall, and it's so true, isn't it? Someone's waiting for your next bit of genius. Do you think, Lee, you can learn creativity, or is it just in you?
I think it's in you. I think you can learn to be creative in a different type of space that you inhabit. But I think you've got to be born a creative person. I think you've got to have creativity within you, And when I look back to my childhood, and I didn't know it at the time, but when I look back at the way I was and what I did and the things that I used to sort of like doing and how I went about it, it's all there. You can spot it a mile away, and I can spot it now, and I can see it in my kids. I can see, and in other people's kids. You can see the ones that are creative and the ones that aren't, and it's no bad thing. It's kind of like everybody's. There's something for everybody, isn't there? But I think if you've got a bit of a creative gene, you can adapt it. It doesn't have to be, oh, I'm a great painter and so that's it. I think if you're, it's not lost on me that, and I always say this as well, and I always say this to if I ever speak to young people and stuff like that, I go to my daughter's school every now and then, do chats to the sixth formers and stuff. It's like, it doesn't matter what you end up doing in life in some ways, as long as you love doing it. Because if you're really lucky enough to find something that you love doing, great. It doesn't matter what it is, and if for some reason that you're not quite doing the thing that you really want to do, but you're stuck doing something else in the meantime, be brilliant at it regardless. So if you're a scaffolder, be the best scaffolder you can be. If you're if you're working at Sainsbury's stacking the shelves, be the best bloody shelf stacker they've got. Do you know what I mean? Excel in because if you're excelling in your life, you feel as though you're excelling in your life, and you're passionate about it, and you're bringing a lot to it. That can be adapted into any given situation, and I feel that way about creativity.
It's very clear to me that you're obviously, and always have been, what one might call aspirational or ambitious. Is that something that has developed over time, or have you, again, is that something that's nature as opposed to nurture? Curiosity, ambition, aspiration, wanting to be the best you can be in what you do.
I think I don't think maybe subconsciously I'm ambitious. I'm not sure I'm consciously ambitious, because I've never. I think the business that I work in is very political at times, and I think if you're really clever politically, you can maneuver your way through the business without ever sort of falling at any of the hurdles, And I've never really been that way. I've been much more heart on sleeve, just go for it, and as long as I'm happy about what's happening and what I'm doing, then I'll just go for it. And so I don't think that. Maybe subconsciously I am, but certainly not consciously. But aspirational and aspiring towards things, absolutely. I would pour my heart and soul into anything and everything that I felt sort of passionate about, and it's stood me in good stead.
And then I guess you had to develop some pretty strong leadership skills as you started to get more into the management side, if you like, and you had to start to get people to and influence people to do what you wanted in the timescales you needed it to be done. Was that when you started to develop leadership skills as well?
Well, the great thing about it is I brought lots of leadership skills with me into the industry because of my previous life. So I mean, I often talk about the fact that I was a scaffolder, and all that type of stuff. But in truth, by the age of 21, I'd moved into the office and became management. So really early doors, I'd you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you've ever met any scaffolders. They're a rough bunch. And at 21, I'm managing 100 scaffolders all over the southwest England. I'd moved down to Portsmouth by then, and they were tough. And I'm 21, and I was managing them, And you kind of go, and if you can manage them at 21, managing a TV crew, you know what I mean, is like, and I so I suppose that it all came quite easy to me, all that. And I was really fortunate in that way. And again, it's probably one of the reasons why I climbed the ladder so quickly as well, is because, I demonstrated those skills really early on to the people that were watching. But yeah, so it wasn't, I didn't ever feel like it was something I developed before I came anywhere near the industry.
You reminded me actually of a story that I managed to interview the comedian Stan Boardman a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
And I said to him, he said to me, I said, how did you become a comedian? What made you want to become a comedian? And he said, I was a pipe fitter welder and I was so cold all the time. I just wanted to be inside.
Good, isn't he?
And he was dead serious. He said, I just dreamed of being in a job that was inside, and I suddenly found I could make people laugh and I wouldn't be cold anymore. Brilliant. So it's just a funny thing around motivations and such like. So finally then, television's changing at a staggering scale and a staggering pace. Where do you think, I know you're not Nostradamus, but where do you think television might go in the next few years as the internet continues to take over the world?
Well, I think that the great thing about being a content provider, which is, sort of industry speak for people that make stuff, is that the more and more platforms there are, the more places you can sell your wares, the more places you can, take your ideas and say, what about this? What about this? The problem is because it becomes so fractured that, when we were kids, 20 million people will watch Blind Date. Well, if you put Blind Date on the telly now, it'd get 2 million. And you kind of go, so your reach is nowhere near it was before. And so that, and in many ways, the knock-on effect of having lots and lots of platforms and lots of streamers, and, look, we all know that network television is a dodo industry. And in 10 years' time, there'll probably only be the BBC or something, who knows? But and it all moved online anyway. Is that there'll always be a need for content. Mm. It's how that content is created is what will massively, massively change. The platforms are always going to change. So 20, 30 years ago, there were 4 channels, and then all of a sudden Channel 5 tips up. Well, before Sky and all that type of stuff. And then look at the differences that Sky brought in, and then look at all the differences that digital brought in. And now look at the streamers. Netflix, it only felt like yesterday Netflix was something that they delivered you a DVD through the front door. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Now,
I do, yeah.
It's kind of like Amazon. Amazon, what content provider? Don't they do? It's cardboard boxes, aren't they? And it's kind of like, so, you've got all the new ones, and Disney have got their own platform, and Sony have got a platform, and it's just that's all never ending. And so all the platform, the way that we consume content from television is going to massively change and keep changing in the way that we sort of view it. And that's obvious, and everyone knows that. But it's the way it's created and the way it finds itself to those platforms is the really interesting thing for me. And the way it is now, all the middle stuff has gone. So now it's all about really great big telly. So I'm talking about another series of Line of Duty, big sort of event piece of drama that everyone's looking forward to. 10 million people tune in, and then you've got from a entertainment perspective, you've got it's Bake Off again. How brilliant. It's I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here for the next 3 weeks. How brilliant, and so all those things that people look forward to. And that's kind of the same as like, the World Cup or the European Championships or, the Masters Golf or whatever it is, these big event type pieces that are in entertainment, drama, sport, that sit in the schedules. The rest of it, I think, is going to become, and is becoming, and kind of is already, is relatively low cost, relatively cheap, factual, entertainment, cheaper ways of doing drama, and sort of, and all that stuff. That's a lot of it's quite entry level stuff, and I'm making a show at the moment that I make a Sunday morning show for ITV at the moment. It's got Alan Titchmarsh. It's a lovely magazine style show out in the countryside. Has lots of celebrity guests come in. It's really lovely lovely show.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, the lovely weekend. The money that we get paid for that, the cash that the budget we receive for that is it would make your eyes water how low the cost of that show is. And if you compare, and if I was making that show 20 years ago, I'd have got 4 times the cost for it.
Wow.
But that's because the way that we make television now is massively changed. And I think that, in 5 or 10 years time, you just do it on that. And that's happening kind of now. People are making shows now. I mean, my son, who's 10, makes his own little films on his iPhone and edits them himself on the iPhone, and they're really good. And you kind of go, so that's where that, so there'll be loads of all this amazing, loads of crap, tons of stuff that you've got to trawl through. There's that Sean Walsh, the comic, does this great gag about Netflix where he kind of goes, me and my girlfriend, we don't watch linear television, we don't watch networks and stuff. We just, when we get in at night after work, let's see what's on Netflix, and they go, right, let's have a look, and they go, no, hold on, go back. Oh, seen it. No.
It's true, isn't it?
True, isn't it? Right, because there's so much shit. Sorry for swearing. There's so much crap that you just kind of go, actually, finding something really good to watch is quite hard. And that whole word of mouth thing, which happens loads now, where people go, oh my God, have you seen Your Honor on Sky? It's like really good. It's got Bryan Cranston in it. If I were you, I'd watch it. And that's where you get your recommendations from now. So instead of going to Sean Walsh, no, you go, oh, Mary at work, the other day said she'd watched Your Honor on Sky. Maybe we should give that a go. And that's how people are getting to find out what to watch in this sea of stuff that's out there. And it's the same on YouTube as well, isn't it?
Yeah. You've got, but I always think with YouTube is, I don't care how much crap there is. I don't care how many kittens there are falling out of trees. The particular shows that I like, I can access immediately, anywhere, anytime. And I love that show. And the fact there's periphery stuff going on all over the place, I'm not really that bothered and not interested. I just home in on what I want.
Yeah. So that proliferation of, and that spread of content, and that the amount of platforms you can find for your creative wares is huge, and will only get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But the bigger that gets, the smaller the budgets get, apart from the really big eventy type stuff. So it's just finding ways to make it work.
Lee, thanks very much for joining me today. Wow, I really enjoyed that, I have to say.
My pleasure.
As somebody that probably always met, when they say, if you hadn't ended up what you're doing, what would you be doing? Television is probably, your career probably would have been my career if I'd been in a parallel universe and had a similar kind of opportunity. So it's on a personal level, it's fascinating to hear your stories, fascinating to hear you speaking about it. So I really appreciate your time. It's been very, very enjoyable, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. Part of what we're about is inspiring people to connect with their passion and then make a living from it. And what a great inspiration you are to people in that arena.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Phil. It's been a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lee.
Cheers. Bye.